Dust motes drifted through the single attic window like slow snow, settling on cardboard boxes that hadn't been opened since the Clinton administration. Claire Morrow, 51 years old, sat cross-legged on the plank floor in a faded Rutgers sweatshirt, a photograph pinched between her fingers. Four girls in front of Westfield High, 1989, squinting into the sun. She could name three of them without hesitation. The fourth face, round cheeks, dark braid, a gap between her front teeth. She pressed her thumb over, then pulled it away. Emily Voss had been dead for 23 years. A car accident on Route 22, February of 2001, 2 weeks after her 30th birthday. The official story had always been ice on the road, a guardrail that gave way. Claire had sent flowers to the funeral home and never spoken about it again. Not to her husband, not to her daughter, not to anyone. She set the photograph face down on the floor. The attic smelled of cedar and old paper and something else she couldn't name. The package arrived on a Thursday in early October, left on Claire's porch in Montclair between the recycling bin and a pot of dead geraniums. No return label. The postmark was smeared beyond reading. Inside the brown paper wrapping was a hardcover journal, burgundy cloth, the initials EV stamped in gold on the lower right corner. A folded index card tucked inside the front cover read only, "She would have wanted you to have this." No signature. The handwriting belonged to no one Claire knew. Claire set the journal on her kitchen table beside a mug of coffee that had gone cold. She opened the cover slowly, the spine cracking like a knuckle. Emily's handwriting filled the first page in blue ballpoint, small, precise letters that leaned slightly right. The first entry was dated March 14th, 1998. Claire read it once, then again. Emily wrote about a party at someone's lake house, about a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear, about a name she had written in capital letters and then scratched out so hard the pen had torn the paper. By page 30, the coffee was forgotten. Emily had written about the Morrow family specifically, Claire's family, in at least 4 separate entries spanning 1998 to 2000. She mentioned Claire's father, Gerald Morrow, by his full name. She described seeing him at a diner in Westfield on a Tuesday afternoon with a woman Emily did not recognize. A woman with a young boy who called Gerald by a name that was not Dad, but was close enough to make Emily stop eating her sandwich and stare. Claire turned the page. Her hands were not entirely steady. One entry, dated September 3rd, 1999, described a conversation Emily had initiated with Gerald Morrow outside the Stop and Shop on Central Avenue. She had approached him directly. He had gone still, Emily wrote, the way a person goes still when they are calculating something. He had told her that what she thought she saw was not what it was, and that some things were better left alone for everyone's sake. Emily had written the word everyone in quotation marks and underlined it twice. Then she had written, "He knows that I know, and now I'm afraid he knows where I live." At 2 a.m, Claire walked the length of her living room in socked feet, the journal open in one hand. The radiator knocked and hissed. She had read every entry twice. Emily had never gone to the police. She wrote that she had considered it, but was afraid no one would believe her. She had also written, in the last pages of the journal, that she had hidden physical proof of what she had discovered. Letters, photographs, documents. She had hidden them in the one place no one from the Morrow family would ever think to look. The next morning, Claire pulled up the 2001 Star-Ledger archive on her laptop. The accident report described a single vehicle collision on Route 22 westbound, 11:47 p.m., February 9th. Black ice cited as the cause. No other vehicles involved. But the last entry in Emily's diary was dated February 7th, 2 days before the crash. In it, Emily had written that she was going to send the diary to Claire and retrieve the hidden documents from the basement herself. She had written, "If something happens to me before I can do this, at least someone else will know." Claire stared at the screen for a long time. The house on Birchwood Lane still had the same green shutters, though one hung at a slight angle now. Claire sat in her car across the street for 11 minutes before she got out. The maple in the front yard had grown enormous, its roots buckling the sidewalk in 2 places. She had spent 18 years in that house. She had learned to ride a bike on that driveway. She had no idea what had been hidden beneath it. She crossed the street, walked to the front door, and rang the bell. The current owners, a couple who had bought the house in 2008, let her into the basement without much resistance. She had told them she was looking for a box of family documents left behind in the sale. The basement smelled of mildew and old concrete. A bare bulb swayed overhead. Claire stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the far wall, where a wooden utility shelf stood exactly where it always had. Emily's diary had described it precisely. 3rd shelf from the bottom, left side, a seam in the paneling behind it that did not match the rest of the wall. She dragged the utility shelf away from the wall, the rubber feet shrieking against the concrete. Behind it, the wall was bare, except for a seam in the paneling, a rectangle about the size of a shoebox, its edges darkened with age. Claire pressed her fingers along the seam, and the panel gave inward with a dry click. The space behind it was no deeper than 8 inches. Inside sat a metal lockbox, the kind sold at hardware stores, gray and dented, sealed with a combination lock set to 000. The combination lock opened on the first try. Emily had written the numbers in the diary's back cover, a detail Claire had nearly missed. Inside the box was a bundle of letters held with a rubber band that crumbled when she touched it, and a manila envelope containing 8 photographs. The letters were addressed to a woman named Diane Pruitt in Hackettstown, New Jersey. The return address on each one was her father's office on South Avenue. Claire turned the top photograph over. It showed Gerald Morrow at a backyard barbecue, his arm around a boy of about 7, both of them grinning at the camera. She sat in the car for 47 minutes, reading each letter in sequence. Gerald Morrow had written to Diane Pruitt over 9 years, from 1983 to 1992. The letters described a life running parallel to the one Claire had grown up inside. A son named Paul, born in October 1984, 2 years after Claire herself. Birthday cards, school plays, a trip to Cape May in the summer of 1989, the same summer 4 girls had posed in front of Westfield High. Claire was in both photographs. She had no idea she had a brother. Rain started on the Garden State Parkway, the kind that comes sideways and turns the road into a mirror. Claire's mother, Barbara Morrow, lived in a ranch house in Summit, 20 minutes from Westfield. She was 78 years old and still answered her own door, still kept the porch light on until 10. Claire pulled into the driveway at 6:14 p.m. with the lockbox on the back seat and the diary in her bag. She sat for 1 full minute with the engine running, rain hammering the roof. Barbara Morrow stood in her kitchen in a quilted housecoat, a dish towel in her hand, and when Claire set the photographs on the counter between them, the dish towel dropped to the floor. Rain drove against the window above the sink, casting shifting shadows across the walls. Claire placed each letter on the counter one at a time, 9 years of correspondence, and said nothing. Barbara's face did not collapse. It went still, the way a face goes still when something carried for decades finally lands on a surface outside the body. She sat down in the nearest chair without looking for it. Barbara had known since 1992. Gerald had come to her that autumn and told her everything. The woman in Hackettstown, the boy, the 9 years of letters. He had ended the relationship, he said. He had promised it was over. Barbara had made a decision that night at the kitchen table, in this same house, that she would not destroy her daughter's childhood over a man's failure. She had chosen silence. She had chosen it again and again for 30 years, each year the silence growing heavier and more load-bearing, until the whole structure of the family rested on it. Claire turned from the counter and faced her mother. She asked, low and controlled, whether Gerald had ever mentioned Emily Voss by name. Barbara's chin lifted slightly. Claire asked again, louder, Barbara said she didn't know what Claire was talking about, so Claire picked up the diary and read the September 1999 entry aloud. Emily's words about Gerald going still, about the word everyone in quotation marks, about being afraid he knew where she lived. When Claire finished, she set the diary down and said, 2 years after Emily wrote this, she was dead. Barbara looked at the table. She asked her mother if Gerald had known about Emily, about what Emily had found, about the diary, about the box in the basement. Barbara's hands tightened on the table. She said she did not know. She said it twice. Claire watched her mother's face for the 3 seconds after the second denial, the eyes sliding slightly left, the thumb pressing hard into the opposite palm. Barbara was 78 years old and had been carrying this for 30 years. She was not a skilled liar, only a practiced one. The third time Claire asked, Barbara pressed both hands over her face and held them there. Then she said that Gerald had told her, in the spring of 2001, that the problem had been handled. Those were his words exactly, handled. He had never explained further, and Barbara had never asked, because by then she had learned that not asking was the same as not knowing, and not knowing was the only way she had found to keep breathing. Gerald Morrow had died of a stroke in 2014. He had taken whatever he meant by handled to a cemetery in Westfield. Claire gathered the letters and photographs from the counter and locked them back in the box. She did not hug her mother. She did not say goodbye. She walked to the front door, pulled it open, and stood for a moment in the doorway with the rain coming down on the porch steps. Barbara did not follow. The porch light was on, the same as it had been every night for 30 years, casting the same yellow circle on the same wet concrete. Claire stepped off the porch and walked to her car in the rain, without running. She sat in the driveway with the engine off and the rain drumming the roof. The diary was on her lap. She opened it to the last entry, February 7th, 2001, and read the final paragraph once. Then she picked up her phone and photographed each of the last 4 pages, the flash throwing white light against the rain-fogged windows. When she finished, she scrolled back through the images, checking that Emily's handwriting was legible in each frame. It was. She sent all 4 photographs to her own email address with the subject line, "Keep this safe." 7 days later, Claire drove to the Union County Clerk's office in Elizabeth and requested the accident report for Emily Voss, February 9th, 2001. The report was 41 pages. She sat at a reading table under fluorescent lights for 2 hours, working through it section by section. The investigating officer had noted that the guardrail on the Route 22 curve showed evidence of prior impact, a dent pattern inconsistent with the Voss vehicle's point of contact. The note had been marked inconclusive, and the file had been closed. No follow-up investigation had been opened. On a Wednesday morning in the 3rd week of October, Claire drove to an attorney's office on Bloomfield Avenue in Montclair and placed the lockbox and the diary on the desk. The attorney, a woman named Renata Osei, who handled civil litigation and kept a framed photograph of a golden retriever on her bookshelf, listened for 40 minutes without interrupting. At the end, she picked up the diary with both hands and held it carefully, the way people hold things they understand to be significant. She told Claire she could not promise an outcome. Claire said she understood. She signed the intake form and left. Fairview Cemetery on East Broad Street was quiet on a Tuesday afternoon, the grass still damp from the previous night's rain. Emily Voss's headstone was gray granite, modest, with her birth and death years and the phrase "beloved daughter" beneath her name. Claire crouched and looked more closely at the base of the stone. Tucked behind it, sheltered by the granite overhang, was a laminated card, a school photograph, Emily at maybe 16, the gap between her front teeth wide in a smile. On the back, in a handwriting Claire did not recognize, someone had written, "We still think about you." Claire stood and looked around the empty cemetery. She drove home on Route 22, westbound. Near exit 41, she slowed without planning to and pulled onto the shoulder just past the long curve where the guardrail was new and clean. She sat with the hazard lights ticking, and took out her phone. Renata Osei answered on the second ring. Claire told her about the laminated card at the grave, the initial P, the handwriting she didn't recognize. A pause on the line. Then Renata said, "Paul Pruitt. I found him last week. He's been in Hackettstown his whole life." Claire looked at the guardrail through the passenger window. She said, "Does he know about any of this?" Renata said, "He's been waiting for someone to call." Back in the kitchen in Montclair, Claire set the diary on the table beside the cold coffee mug from 3 weeks ago. She had never moved it. Her phone lit up on the counter. A 908 area code, Hackettstown. She watched it ring twice. Then she picked it up. A man's voice said her name, Claire, the way a person says a name they have practiced saying, careful and uncertain. She said yes. He said, "My name is Paul. I think our father knew each other." Claire pulled out the chair at the kitchen table and sat down. Outside, the maple stood bare against the gray sky. She did not look at it. Another hour, finally told. This has been Untold Hours.